TipTrace.
Hello everybody and welcome to TipTrace. This is a new show where I analyse and deconstruct artwork that I think is particularly good or particularly inspiring. And the first time around we're going to be analysing and recreating this piece by Richard Perez. It's a relatively old piece of his. It's basically a faux album cover for one of his favourite bands. And what I particularly love is this emblem. It uses really simple colours, really strong shapes, really good use of mosaic balance to create a really striking emblem that I think is worth deconstructing. So the first step is to analyse what we like about it. The second step is to deconstruct how it was made, what shapes it consists of, what colours, things like that. And the final step is to compare the two to see how well we did in doing so. So without any further ado, let's jump right into step 1, analysis.
Part 1. Analysis.
Okay, so the first thing to do is to make sure we understand what it is we like about this piece. Before I go into too much detail, I am going to say do make sure to check out Richard Perez on Dribbble. He's got all sorts of incredible stuff on there. This is not the least of which is really, really good. So do go and check him out on dribbble.com. His name is Richard Perez with a Z. The link will be in the description in any case. But let's get into the analysis of this then. I really like its emblem design. It looks like it could be sort of a logo or a sort of a main custom graphic for a brand, which is really strong. I really love the simple color palette. It only uses 5 colors, but it still gets across everything that it tries to convey, even though it's not being overly complicated with gradients and things like that. I especially love the fact that he hasn't used white. He's used transparent on a white textured background to achieve the light angles and the light aspects of this. And the final thing that I love is this really good use of mosaic balance with all these little extra elements here inside the emblem or the shield. Mosaic balance is really hard to pull off well, but he has done so here. If you don't know what mosaic balance is, it's basically the idea that whilst there is no uniform balance in terms of objects' visual weight, the overall sense that you get from them is one of order and is one of, balance. I've done a basic compositional theory in which I go into that into a lot of detail, so check that out if you're not sure. That's pretty much the 3 main aspects I love about this. I love its simplicity, I love the color palette, and I love the mosaic balance. So we're going to dive right into deconstructing this now in Illustrator, and we're going to see what this design is made of.
Part 2. Deconstruction.
All right, so the first step of deconstructing anything is understanding what's there, and the best way to do that is to deconstruct the color palette first, I find. So I'm just going to draw a quick box over our emblem and then right click with both those selected to make a clipping mask to get rid of everything that we don't need so that we're not confusing our eye. Secondly then, I'm just going to go and create a few little rectangles and just create a simple color palette from this, which I'm going to keep off to the side for this one. I'm not going to bother creating swatches because there's so few things that we're using in here. It's just as simple and just as good to just keep some rectangles off to the side of our artboard and use those as our color palette. So there's 5 colors in here. The off-white, like I mentioned, which I'm just going to make slightly darker than it is to account for the texture in the background. There's this lovely orange, a pink, purple, and this brilliant dark blue for the background, which I absolutely love. These are the only 5 colors used in the entire design, which is brilliant. The next step then, once you've done that, is to start thinking about the basic shapes of what this thing is made up of. And this is where the deconstruction comes in. You might see a rounded rectangle, you might see a circle with a rectangle embedded into it. But really all they are, you might see a complicated eye and a straight rainbow and all these little crosses. All they are the 2 same basic shapes, a square or a circle. And in deconstructing this, we can start to understand how it was made and how simple these shapes are that make up the complicated design. So let's just dive right into that then. The first thing to do is to grab your ellipse tool. Make sure you've got one of your colors on there for now, just so you can see what you're doing. And I'm just going to go down to the middle of this design, or as close as I can get. And I'm going to start to click and drag upwards. If I hold Alt and Shift, it'll create a perfect circle. And what I can do is I can drag this up or out until I know that my cursor is roughly aligned with the edge of this shield. And that creates us a circle that we know is the width of our entire design. From here, we're not going to do any more tracing, even though the show is called TipTrace. It's going to be all building it from ourselves, because otherwise, what's the point? We're just copying. You don't learn anything from copying. So we've got a basic shape now. This is going to be the construction of the rest of the shield. There's a few ways you could do this. You could create a circle like I've done, and then come over to our rectangle tool here. You could find your anchor points on your circle, like so, and then just draw a rectangle upwards until you're happy with the height of it. That's one way of creating this bottom shape. You then, of course, could grab both of those and merge them together. A second way of doing so is to grab your rounded rectangle tool, do the same thing to start with, grab your middle, go to your top, and just hold Alt until you get to the edges, like so. Okay, and then stretch this out. Then you can take your corners and close them all off, and just take your bottom two corners and bring them all the way into the middle. And that will create the same emblem shape in a different way. It's entirely up to you how you do it. It really, really doesn't matter. The first thing I'm going to do now, though, is take everything that we want to keep, our color palette and our shield, cut that with Control X and just put it on the layer above. So that if I paste in place with Control F, I can lock away the shield underneath and we're no longer accidentally grabbing it. Okay, so we're ready to start deconstructing how this is made. Let's take this shield background as the first element of that. If I copy with Control C, paste in place with Control F, and then using my eyedropper tool, select the white, I can then scale this down, holding Shift and Alt, until I get roughly where the start of the white section of that shield begins. And as you can see, we've then created the outside of this shield. Another way to do that, an alternative way to create the outside of this shield is, of course, to come along with your stroke of about, I don't know, let's just take a guess at it, 20 points. And you can start clicking and dragging your pen tool to create this shape outside. However, that takes a little bit more time. You'd have to make sure that there's no fill on it, and you'd have to get these curves perfectly right. I think the best method is creating the circle and rectangle, merging the two shapes together. Okay, so take this white shape, do the same thing as we did before, Control C and Control F, shrink it down with Alt Shift and then clicking and dragging just a little bit more until you create a border that you're happy with, and just go back to that dark blue. And that's it, we've got the background, it's as simple as that. Where this design really comes alive is in this eye design here with this sort of tapered rectangles coming down. You could do this with a perspective tool. You could do it with the warp tool. What I'm going to try and do is do it with the blend tool, which should be a more mathematical way of doing it, which means we should get a accurate representation. But in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is create the eye. So we can go back to our ellipse tool here, make sure we're on a white color, and I'm just going to click and drag over this eye, like so, until I get a rough shape that I'm happy with. Make sure that lines up pretty much. Yeah, that'll do. What we can do then is, with this shape selected, just somewhere where you can see it, if you hold Alt, Shift, and then click and drag, you'll create a duplicate of that shape, which you can move, okay? From there, I'm going to drag it down until the center point of that circle hits the bottom point of the circle above. So we get two shapes that intersect. If we select both of those shapes, go to our Pathfinder tool, which if you don't have, you can go to Window and then Pathfinder. We can select the intersect option there, and that leaves only the part where the shapes are overlapping each other, which gives us our eye. It's really simple, okay? That eye is basic, okay, that's fine. We want to add the iris to it. We want to add the rainbow behind it as well. It's best to keep those all as separate shapes as much as possible. So we can come in with our ellipse tool again, find the center of our eye. Holding Alt Shift, we can click and drag until we get an iris that we're happy with, okay? I'm going to do so like that. Again, we can take the dark color of the background. I'm going to copy and paste in place with Control C and Control F and shrink it down a little bit again. That's going to give us the thickness of our iris. If we can then select both of those shapes, zoom in a little bit, that would help. We can select both of these shapes like so and choose minus front from the Pathfinder tool. That will allow us to remove that front shape that we just made, giving us our perfect iris. Again, you could do this with stroke if you want to. It really is up to you. I think I'm going to shrink that one down just a little bit more though and make our iris a little bit chunkier. Maybe to about there. There, perfect. I'm happy with that. Let's take both of those shapes then and move them down until they're roughly aligned with the other design. Now, what you're aiming for here is equal distance around the bottom and two left and right sides of this eye. For example, if I push this down too far, the bottom side here would be too thin compared to the arcing sides of the either side of the eye. So if you try and keep that as even as possible when lining that up, you'll get a nice round shape where this curve will pretty much follow this curve. Again, if you wanted to create the eye, you could Control C, Control F on this shape and shrink that down until you get the eye design that you're happy with. In fact, that's probably what Richard did. But like I'm saying, this series is really all about showing you how many different ways there are to do the same thing and deconstructing how I would have done it or how someone else would have done it. It's not about saying one way is better than the other or trying to prove who's the best. It's just about deconstructing and analysing what looks good for the reasons it looks good. So we have our eye, we have our shield. I'm just going to group those objects together behind the shield so I know that they're all on one layer. And then we can start working on the rainbow effect here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pen tool and just give myself a little stroke to work with, maybe a white one, like so. And I'm going to try and replicate these shapes with only having to draw one line, because that way we know that all the rest of the copies of the line we make are going to be exactly the same as the others. For example, if I were to click intersect on this top left-hand portion of the shield, and then left click somewhere down below near the bottom of the eye where I know that this path is going to be hidden behind the stroke. So if I were to choose here, for example, that's the only line we're going to have to draw now for the rest of this rainbow. What we can do is Alt drag that line and then choose Object, Transform, Reflect to flip it around, reflect vertically. We can then position this line so it lines up with the right-hand side. And we again know that it's going to be hidden behind this stroke down at the bottom here. Okay. What we're going to do now is generate the rest of the lines in between and use those as a guide. These are only really going to act as guides for the final shape. These aren't going to be incorporated into the final shape, which is why it doesn't matter what they look like. If we go up to Object and then Blend and Make, what you'll probably get is this result here, where it creates one single shape between the two. What Blend does is it tries to approximate the averages between the two shapes and creates as many copies as it thinks it needs to blend them perfectly. The Blend tool has trouble with lines, but in this circumstance, that's actually a good thing, because what it means we can do is we can come in and tweak that to our needs. If, for example, we go to Object, Blend again, but this time choose Blend Options, still having this selected, what we can do is preview all of our changes and change to specified steps. Now, we have our outside lines and we have our middle line. So there is one step between the first instance of the line and the last instance of the line. What we're going to need is 3 to replicate the 3 lines here that make up the 4 different shapes. So if we say specified steps 3 and hit OK, or just click anywhere else, you'll see that we get 4 rectangles made of 5 lines that are cut perfectly equally between them. So now we can hit OK, and we can use these as a guide to create the shapes that we need. For example, if I now have this deselected, make sure I've got a fill of one of our fill colors. I'm just going to choose the white one. I can come in and using smart guides, I can choose to intersect these different elements together. So if I were to start here, for example, on this path, go to the corner. Oops, sorry, I'm accidentally drawing on that line there. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly do it on a new layer. I can choose here, like so. Go to the corner of this intersection here, go all the way down to the bottom here, intersect again, come across to our next line, which we can intersect with, come up to the corner here and join our shapes together. We've now got 1/4 of our perfect shape, okay? Because I haven't put pixel perfection on, it's not quite there, but I'll explain why that doesn't matter in a minute. In fact, what you can do is go past those shapes if you wanted to as well. So another way to do it, of course, is to come down and start at the bottom of the eye here, making sure that they line up as best they can with the intersected points, like so. And you can bring them out past these lines, so long as they line up with the white guides that you've created, okay? Like so. Then you can bring this one out so it comes up past it like so. And you've got the rectangle that you're happy with. Brilliant. We can now get rid of these lines. It doesn't matter, okay? So we can come in and unlock this layer, remove these shapes. What we can do now is Alt drag that again, Object, Transform, Reflect. Yeah, okay. Bring that over to the other side until it lines up with that intersection point. We've now got the 2 shapes for the outside, and all we need to do is split down the middle and go and create the other shapes like this. Go to the middle of the shape here, make sure it intersects with the center of the eye, come across, draw your path lines. Now, there is a second way to do it, which I'll show you as well. If you were to keep these shapes, you could in fact draw the center line now, like so. Coming in here, drawing a center line, making sure it lines up with this path here, bringing that down. Then you can do the same thing. You can delete this layer underneath, like so. You can select both of these, copy them, object, transform, reflect, bring those in line with the edge of the shape, like so. Okay, making sure they line up properly, like that. And then you've got all your 4 shapes that you need. Then you just got to simply come in and color those in your palette colors. So pink and purple. There we go. Now, at the moment, this looks quite ugly because it's all overlapping. But all that means is we're not going to get any weird bleeding on the edges of our shape where things underlap or overlap when we actually come to finalize this design. All we need to do now is click this shape underneath, okay? Double click inside our group and select our smallest shield. If we copy that and come out of the group and then hit Control F to paste it in place, we can actually then bring it completely to the front of the design. So if I make sure I'm on the right layer, paste that in front. We can then select the shield and our 4 rectangles, right click and choose Make Clipping Mask. And all that does is it clips these shapes inside of the rectangle that we just made, meaning there's no overlap and our shapes proceed to the very edge of the shield underneath, which is exactly what we want. We can then cut this, make sure it's all on the right layer, paste it in place, and we can then push it below our iris, but above our eye. And that's it. It looks good and we're ready to go. The final step then is to create these little shapes in the background. And while they are simple, they are just crosses, rectangles, and circles. This is what really makes the design. If you look at these two side by side at the moment, this shape looks not incredibly bland, but it doesn't look as good as it could be. These little mosaic elements in the background really add a lot of character. And like I said, it's hard to get them balanced well. So the fact that they've managed to do this in such a simple design is really impressive and is worthy of note. So what we're going to do is we're just going to remove our extra layers that we don't need. And we can come in and start replicating these mosaic designs. So if I grab our little rectangle tool like so, I'm just going to quickly trace over this white cross and make sure it is white. What I can do is grabbing this one here, I can duplicate that again with Control C, Control F and rotate it 90 degrees. We've now got our cross, we're happy, we're ready to go. Okay. If I select both of these elements, I can merge them together so they're in a single shape, which is good for us. And I can start thinking about lining these things up. So we're going to take this cross. We know that this cross is exactly the same, just maybe a little bit smaller. So if we copy, paste that in place again, we can bring this over, shrink it down a little bit, and we can just use our colors to make it the right color that we need. I'm not worrying about positioning these for the moment. Okay, I'm just going to worry about replicating the shapes. So we're also going to need a rectangle. I'm probably going to make this square here the same size as the cross. Okay, I'm going to make it orange. I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees and I'm going to push it down to the side a little bit. We also need a rectangle here and a rectangle here, getting incrementally smaller. So we'll do the same thing. We'll copy that across. We'll shrink it down just a little bit. This is purple. We'll make that purple. And we'll put one down here, which is much smaller, that will also keep purple. The last remaining elements then are this pink circle and a white circle. I'm not going to explain to you how to make those again. You just go to your ellipse tool and draw a circle. It's as simple as that. Okay. This time, however, we're going to need it pink. And this slightly smaller circle down here, we're going to need to be white. Perfect. Now comes the interesting bit. Okay, we have our elements, and if we look at them side by side, because these are scattered, this design looks messy. Okay. And this next bit is hard to just explain how to lay these shapes out. It really does come with just experience and sort of having a good eye at it, but everyone should be able to do it as long as you think about it critically. You need to analyze the visual weight of all the different elements you've got on the page. Okay. Now, visual weight is made up of the size of elements, their color, how much that color stands out against the other elements that they've got on the page, how much negative space is around them, the general shape of those elements, all sorts of factors. And each of those factors contributes to that particular element's visual weight. Now, for example, this orange square on the blue background draws the viewer's eye more so than the smaller pink cross. And that means that this yellow rectangle, has more visual weight than the cross, meaning that that's going to be heavier in its workspace than the other elements, meaning you probably have to give it a bit more breathing space around it if you want things to feel balanced. Now, with all these different elements you've got on there, mosaic balance is understanding how much each object weighs visually and compensating for that weight with the rest of the elements that you've got on page. Now, most of the time, this comes down to the same simple sort of idea. You want to keep your objects as individual as possible whilst trying to view them all as a whole rather than their own elements. So if we take, for example, this rectangle of design here and think of that as our entire canvas, we need to space these elements out so that visually none of them draws the attention of the viewer's eye more than the other elements. And to do that, it really is just a case of playing around and letting your eyes relax until you get something that you're happy with. Now, for example, what he's done here is create two triangles with the elements. If you were to put a point in the middle of each of these elements, there is two triangles there, but they are not exactly the same as each other, okay? So that means these items have different visual weights, but overall, they weigh the same, which is where mosaic balance comes in, because it's like a mosaic of elements that are visually still balanced, like so, as much as possible. That's pretty much it. We've pretty much finished the design. It's time to jump into part 3, which is the comparison, and see what we've done, why we made those decisions, and how well it holds up against the original.
Part 3. Conclusions.
Okay, so part 3 then is the comparison, where we look at what we've created, compare it to the original item, and see what we did right, what we did wrong, how similar we made it, and start to understand why they made those decisions originally and why it was a good idea to make them again, essentially. So looking at this piece, we can go back to our original notes here. The things we liked about it before were the emblem, the simple color palette, and the mosaic balance. Okay. Now, I think we've replicated this pretty well without just copying it by tracing. The biggest and most important thing to understand here is this mosaic balance of these elements. Okay. The fact that this purple is quite similar to the blue when compared to the rest of these other colors, that helps with the mosaic balance. These purple items blend in, meaning they have less weight, but still do attribute and contribute to the design. These sort of really harsh vertical lines drawing you down to the center where this eye is really help as well. It creates a really strong composition of this kind of circle as a whole, despite the pointed corners, with a triangle in the middle of it. That is the focal point of the design, which works so well because it is purely so simple, and it's the only part with the bold colors of the orange and the pink in it as well. Overall, it's deceptively intricate whilst being visually simple, which is really what you should be aiming for with sort of a lot of design, really. You don't see good design, you just see the good end point of it. And that's what this is. You look at this and you say, yeah, that works, without analyzing why. You only start to look at design, you only start to notice design as a layman when it's wrong. So if you're doing it well, people should just be consuming the product. And that's what they do here. They understand this emblem. It looks great visually. It's really well balanced. The color palette is fantastic. And you just absorb it as a piece of artwork rather than start thinking critically like, oh, that's a bit wonky, that's a bit off. In terms of the one we've made next to it, it's pretty close, obviously, because it's such a simple shape. But ultimately, I'm really happy with this. If you guys have been following along, let me know what progress you made. You can post your things on Dribbble, on our Discord, things like that. Just make sure you link back to the original artist when you do, and explain that it is done in the spirit of deconstruction rather than copying. So that is pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Do let me know if you want more of these sort of episodes. It's a new format that I'm trying out. I'm not sure what the reception is going to be. I'm not sure if there's going to be an audience for it. So your feedback is really important for this series if you do want to see more. Again, you can let me know if you want to see more on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Dribbble, Discord, in the comments. Anyway, really, I'm sort of quite active on social media and Facebook and things like that. So that is it. Thank you for watching episode 1. Hopefully there'll be an episode 2. I'm not releasing these on any kind of schedule though. So just let me know. If you've got any designs you do want me to analyze and deconstruct, send them over. I'll take a look. If it's something that I think I can recreate and I can think there's benefit in recreating from, I'll definitely take a look at that. But for now, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.